Ja, hej på er allesammans. Idag får jag ta över lite från Linus. Och nu har jag presenterat på svenska, but from now on we go for English. This book was given to me, and it's even possible to get it at the library in Sweden. They ordered it special for me, and it is an excellent book. It is called Bitten, and the author is to the right of you, Kris Newby, with us directly from somewhere outside San Francisco, California.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm in Park City, Utah. The Olympics was here a while ago. In the mountains. I'm in the mountains.
In the mountains, yes. And we combine together with our mentor, Linus Norremalm, the origin of two of the world's worst epidemics. For me, I died into the HIV story, and we presented that yesterday in Swedish language, so it will just be short here. And Kris has gone into what in Swedish is called Borrelia, but the American name for it is Lyme disease.
Yeah.
And I will present maybe a little more about you, Kris. First, you were a patient and struggled to find out what it was. And then when you found out what it was, you had to heal it from you because it was an awful disease. And then what that finished, you started to dive even more in the origin of this very special disease. So
it's an honor to have you here, Kris Newby.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate the invitation.
And also, okay, now we start by what we do. When you have to trace a disease, there are 4 or 5 important things to look after. The epidemiology, and for me in HIV, it was a clear cut. It started in the east coast of US, in Manhattan Island, because islands are important in these issues. It started in Manhattan. In the first patient retrospectively was diagnosed in December 78. Then in 79, it broke out far more patients. And also in the second half of 79, some patients appeared in San Francisco and Los Angeles. And it was foregone by a trial of hepatitis B vaccine experiment. And that was seeded with HIV, according to what I have found and my mentors. We should mention them too, because one is from LA, Alan Campbell, who sadly died 1st of January this year. But he died due to AIDS and not any corona. And my other mentors are the family of Segal, Jacob and Lily Segal. Okay, what about you and the epidemiology of Lyme disease?
Well, it is sort of interesting that the organism that caused AIDS, the AIDS virus, and the organism that I've studied, Borrelia, they were discovered within the same year. And one thing that's ironic is that AIDS has a whole lot of effective drugs for them, and then Borrelia doesn't. But anyways, I think I was the first person to really look backwards at the epidemiology. The public story was released in 81, 82 that Lyme disease, Borrelia burgdorferi, is caused by the spirochete, and that's what made people really, really sick, starting in the late 60s, around the island of Manhattan and Connecticut and New York. And so what I did when I looked backwards is I realized that it wasn't just Lyme disease that showed up. It was 2 or 3 other tick-borne diseases. There was babesiosis, which was a first-in-man malaria-like organism that was normally in cattle, and all of a sudden it jumped to man. And there was a version of Rocky Mountain spotted fever that it was especially virulent. And there may have been viruses too, but that's sort of a different story. So there's Lyme disease, babesiosis, and it's just very unusual for 3 brand new organisms to show up in such a tiny little area. So that was confusing. But the thing that really made me think about the problem in a different way was when I was doing a documentary about Lyme disease while I was sick. It's actually on Amazon Prime. It's called Under Our Skin. I met the discoverer of Lyme disease, and we developed a relationship. And during some of the interviews, the guy who discovered Lyme disease says, I worked in the biological weapons program, weaponizing fleas, ticks, and mosquitoes for the US during the Cold War. And when I started investigating this new outbreak, he started investigating it in the mid-70s. He says, I thought that it may have been caused by a biological weapons experiment. And during that investigation, he found that there was another organism that could have been making people sick, but he was asked by some unknown powers to hide that information. And that was sort of a shocking confession, because he became a famous man because of that discovery. And what he was saying is, I'm a scientist and I lied about everything that was in those ticks and in the blood of the sick people. So it was shocking. And that sort of started the research for my book, Bitten, because I felt like that was a crime against humanity, violation of the Geneva Convention. The effects of those diseases are long lasting in the environment. They don't affect just humans, but our livestock, our pets, the environment, birds, mammals, and the truth needed to come out if it was true. Now, that was just a confession of one man. So it took me 4 other years to get
Nuremberg.
Yeah, but it took 4 other years to get documentation that said, yes, I think there's merit to his confession. He just wasn't an old, senile old man. He was in his 80s when he confessed. But what I hope my book is a call for other people like me to investigate the aspects of this confession, because it really would help to know what organisms did the military release and where. Or as Willy Burgdorfer, the discoverer of Lyme disease, said, he believed it was caused by an accident. So let's get a record of the accidents, because to make a bioweapon, it's a long process where you test things in the labs and there's lab accidents. You test it in the field and there's field accidents. So that's the premise of my book.
I interrupt a little. When I was thinking about Ireland, my island for HIV was Manhattan. Yeah. But I think in your case, isn't the Plum Island very suspect also? What happened on Plum Island in the 50s and the 60s?
Well, I don't know exactly where the accident is at this point. I just know that Willie said there are accidents. But Plum Island was the center of the anti-animal biological and anti-crop biological weapons program. So they did mass produce ticks there. They do have a history of lab leaks. It's certainly possible that the leak came from there. Based on my research, I think it's more likely that this release came from the anti-human part of the biological weapons program, which was run out of Maryland. And maybe this was just an open air experiment. For example, one of the findings in my book was that in 1962, the biological weapons program under the management of the CIA dropped infected ticks on Cuban sugarcane workers as part of the many operations to try and assassinate and dethrone Fidel Castro. So those experiments were masterminded in Fort Detrick, Maryland, and it was part of the anti-human effort.
No, I started to laugh because you said Maryland in such a fashion. I listened, Marilyn. And for me, Marilyn was a chimpanzee they found in a freezer was the ultimate proof that HIV came from the chimp. But the carcass from Marilyn was found in Fort Edric, and directly she was born in Uganda, but they should have looked around in Fort Edric for the origin, maybe both for HIV and for your pathogen, and or pathogens. We don't know exactly there. One more thing too. You said Lyme disease was given its name 78, but HIV didn't get the name HIV until 86. Before that, it was and the virus wasn't discovered until 83.
Yeah, and
the disease was there, and the disease of Lyme. Okay, we have that too. Many says it has been in Sweden for so many years, but it is Borrelia afzelius and the second vary. But now these days, even Burgdorferi has come to Sweden, so it's a severe disease here also, very severe. And most of the doctors
three different kinds.
Or three different kinds: afzelius, Burgdorferi, and the third one. And the doctors are told we have some very good doctors, but then they can lose their license if they treat the patients very well. One have lost it. Okay, when I'm thinking about the plans for it, in my case, by HIV, we have the appropriations for the Congress to get money for this type of research. Within 5 to 10 years, we want that much of money to create a new infective microorganism. But I think we have a common link also with Operation Paperclip. Have you noticed that in your research?
Well, yes, because one of the reasons I think Willy Burgdorfer was brought over from Sweden is because he was raised
Switzerland.
I mean, yeah, is because he was in Basel and he spoke fluent German, and he said he had dealings with many of the paperclip German bioweapons researchers. That would be under Himmler. And I think the Americans found him useful because he could get the details of their experiments. And so then the Yankees could learn from them and then supersize their plans in their own way. What can I say? The Germans did have a pretty extensive biological weapons program, as did the Japanese. And after World War II, the Russians and the Americans split up those scientists amongst themselves and tried to extract as much information as they could. And so in a way, I think the Russians started a bug-borne weapons race with the Americans, trying to outdo each other. So they put, what Willy Burgdorfer told me is he put his first job coming over from Switzerland in '52 was putting plague in fleas. So bubonic plague, the most, the organism that almost wiped out the human race several times in our history in fleas. And their plan was to stuff the fleas with plague, put them in little tubes, and then put those tubes in a bomb that would be dropped from a plane, and it would rain fleas over the enemy in a battalion-sized area. So that was one plan. His second job was trying to mass produce mosquitoes and put yellow fever in mosquitoes. There was a virus from Trinidad called the Trinidad agent. And there were open air experiments on the fleas only, uninfected, in the poor areas of Georgia and Florida, where it was largely African Americans live there. So from planes, they drop these Aedes aegyptis mosquitoes, and they're the kinds that carry dengue and Zika, not nice mosquitoes. So they drop hundreds of thousands of them on those areas. And they had military people dressed up as public health people to say, oh, we have these mosquito traps in your house. Do you have any mosquitoes in your house? And what they discovered is mosquitoes were very effective at getting in every crack of these areas. And then I think the most shocking experiment I discovered during my research was the army was trying to weaponize ticks. So what Willy Bergdorf would do is take these ticks, stuff a pipette in their mouths, and stuff into their gullets diseases like leptospirosis, that's a spirochete, rabies, tularemia, Venezuelan equine encephalitis, to see if they could find a germ that's unnatural that will stay in these ticks. Then you can drop those ticks on the enemy. And I have from an Army report up here, I'll just read it. The advantage of this tick-borne disease is they inject an agent directly into the body so that a mask is no protection to a soldier, and they will remain alive for some time, keeping an area constantly dangerous.
What's your personal beliefs in Zika?
Oh, I just don't know anything about Zika. But I was going to go back to the most appalling experiment I read about. Is they hired a professor in Virginia, coastal Virginia, so that's just like halfway up the Atlantic coast of America. And he released hundreds of thousands of Lone Star ticks, which were a very aggressive man-biting tick. Before these experiments, they were really only found in the southern United States. And he made them radioactive. So he would inject a pregnant tick with radioactive fluids, and then the tick would have, 2,000 to 3,000 eggs, and all the nymph ticks that were born, or larval ticks, would be radioactive for life. Then he set up grids on the coast and released 1,000 ticks in every grid. And then over months to years, he would go and collect the ticks from the grids to see how far they had crept, because that would be an important information to have if you were going to drop ticks on your enemy, how far they crawled. So he would take them back to his lab and then use a Geiger counter to see how many of them were the original ticks that he dropped. And then he would put those ticks back and keep doing that over and over again. So a year to 2 years after those non-native aggressive man-biting ticks were released, they found them up the coast of America in Long Island. And all of a sudden there was a huge epidemic of Rocky Mountain spotted fever where people were dying and getting seriously, seriously ill. And Rocky Mountain spotted fever is a disease only carried by these ticks in that area. And so I believe that that Army-funded experiment is what caused that outbreak of Rocky Mountain spotted fever. So it's an example of this scientist. He has no remorse for those. His name is Sonnenschein. He has no remorse for those experiments. He laughed when he said that he only needed a city permit to conduct those experiments, and that that experiment would never, ever be approved today.
I take another thread here because I saw in your book you have visited Fort Detrick and were guided in that area. And I have a fellow, also professor in protein chemistry. He has also been there for a short while, and we are looking for Morgellon, because Morgellon could be very interesting in the close future due to what they find in the swabs. But can you tell me a little bit more about Fort Detrick? I don't think it's that well known in Sweden.
Yeah, so Fort Detrick is about a 50-mile drive away from Washington, D.C., and it was an old Air Force base that they turned into really the headquarters and the brains behind the Cold War biological and chemical weapons center. And so that's where they developed things like Agent Orange or the LSD mind control experiments, refined processes for anthrax. And then that was also the headquarters of the entomological warfare program.
I heard it was nicknamed the Anthrax Factory. Or part of it, one building maybe.
Yeah, that was called Black Maria. And even when they tried to tear it down, some of the workers got very, very ill because that anthrax, it's hard to get rid of. Well, it takes a whole lot of bleach.
I think I changed to a little bit new overhead line there, and that is, have you noticed any cover up or misleading information that should hide the real perpetrator from the crime they have committed? I have seen it in AIDS. The two main things were they released first the African green monkey, which they changed to the chimpanzee. All was false. And also they sent out in the AIDS question, they sent out Peter Duisberg to mislead at least the alternative community. Have you seen similar about Borrelia, or have there been an open science?
No, no open science. I mean, I think what we saw in the very beginning is saying that Borrelia caused all the illness around Lyme, Connecticut was a half-truth. That there was this other organism, which was a rickettsial, which is related to Rocky Mountain spotted fever, and it somehow got out. It's a very small organism, very drifty, and there's a long history of them trying to I mean, there's documentation that they tried to weaponize Rocky Mountain spotted fever because it is the most deadly tick-borne disease in the United States. So I would say Borrelia burgdorferi was the first lie, was that caused all the illness. And I think the truth is this messy chronic illness is a combination of tick-borne diseases that somehow got out and bad ticks, new ticks, that is causing this epidemic. It's a complicated problem. There's not a one bug solution to it. The other cover-up that I personally experienced that was really hard was that when the book came out, there was an immediate effort of disinformation. A professor who's highly funded in biosecurity at a university, he immediately published an op-ed in the Washington Post that said, everything in my book were lies, it's ridiculous, it's conspiracy theory. So I immediately called him on the phone and I said, hey, I have some factual corrections for you here. And I was wondering, I mean, there are obvious differences that someone who teaches biosecurity should know them. I said, did you read my book? And he goes, no, I didn't read your book before I wrote it. I'm too busy to read books, which I just found completely shocking. So I said, well, do you mind if I go over these inaccuracies? And he listened to, I only had 4 of them. There are actually about 20 of them. And I said, do you want me to send the books? And he says, well, you can send it to me, but I'll just shred it. So then I wrote a letter talking about these inaccuracies, and I sent it to the Washington Post, and they said, oh, we didn't fact check this because it's an op-ed. But the effect, I mean, the Washington Post, which I used to have a lot of respect for, I was just appalled because the ripple effect of that Washington Post op-ed from a supposed expert really killed the uptake and the acceptance of my book. Yeah. And now there's just no recourse. It just rippled across the internet. So that's my experience with fake news. I can spend 5 years factually researching a book, you know, with pages and pages of references, and a blowhard who's a vet, you know, can totally destroy my reputation.
But still, your book, didn't it lead to an interrogation in the Senate or in the Congress House, in the Parliament in Washington?
Yes, and I think it's had a slow uptake, but it's getting a growing following. So what happened is a congressman in the United States, he read the book, and he's from New Jersey, which is right near Lyme, Connecticut, and his citizens have been really hard affected by this disease. So he held it up in front of Congress. He was working on the Department of Defense budget. And he says, you should read this bit, and it is really credible, and I think we should fund an investigation into bug-borne weapons so we can know what was released where and what protective research has been done for our scientists so we can share that with the world. Because it's really classified. All that stuff is classified now. And because the Department of Defense budget is the biggest piggy bank in the world, the story went viral, and so it took off. And I think this op-ed was a reaction to this congressman's calling for an investigation. It was probably scary for the military.
Okay, I was very unpolite in the beginning, but I don't know really exactly. But you have a long history of scientific education.
So
and you are working at the university.
Right. So I have 2 engineering degrees. My graduate degree was in mechanical engineering at Stanford University. And I was a science and tech, I designed computers, science and tech writer. And then when I got Lyme disease, I became a medical science writer because it was part of my survival. And then I worked 10 years at Stanford in the med school doing medical science writing. So I got a pretty deep knowledge there.
And you are still free to be outspoken like this evening here.
Yeah, yeah. And
great.
Well, I quit Stanford a year ago to work on other things, and I just needed a change. But I would say Stanford, the last year when the book was out, was very supportive, and they were, they listed it on their best science books of 2019, I think. So they were supportive and understanding, and so.
Right. Then should we look now? It's curiosa somehow, but there are 2 Swedish links between our research, and one is Olle Lindqvist. You told me he was a bug researcher here in Uppsala. He was very good. And according to him, he wanted to see if that rickettsia can give MS, multiple sclerosis. He's found it in a few patients. And he was very outspoken. I spoke with him on telephone 2-3 times. But then all of a sudden, I was told he died from, but I think that it was a natural death. But the other in his team, they were reluctant. They only spoke with me by telephone, and they didn't like to go ahead and make an interview with me or like that. And I think we have the similar now in these days with the corona. But more and more doctors, scientists, they come out very bravely. And then, okay, that is another connection too. Sweden is very important, and very few know about it. Even the Swedes, they don't know. We have a Wallenberg group in Sweden. They hold the Ericsson company, and Ericsson company, they are used every time Rockefeller are telephoning Rothschild family from Britain to US. So he holds the lines, so he can cut them whenever he wants. What make Wallenberg very, very important. They are behind the 5G, for example, and they even have a lot of military Saab company, the flight company. They are in the front line in some research. So, and that could be also the reason Sweden and Switzerland managed so well in World War II. We were, could be neutral because they wanted to, the Wallenberg family should have a free country to stay in. Who knows? But that is very important when you look into this corona crisis. And also, that question to you, I would like to, if they will come on, and hopefully it will do now, thanks to so many brave people, a new Nuremberg Congress and a new Nuremberg Tribunal, that also they should include all crimes committed from the end of Second World War in this biowarfare, for example, like your Lyme disease, even my HIV. Though HIV, you can't prove it that properly, but the scientific facts are there, all pointing to artificial origin. And also I spoke to, we are relative good friends, that is Niels Harrit, a chemistry professor in Denmark. He was the one who proved that nanothermite was present in the dust from World Trade Center. So a nanothermite is a rather new artificial chemistry that can provide a temperature high above melting steel and iron. So that explains World Trade Center, how it could fall that fast, the 3 buildings of it. You've heard about the third building, yeah. Oh.
I'm staying away from that controversy. I'm just sticking with my own controversy here. But I'm just trying to push for the disclosure of these documents because it's over 50 years old. These documents should be declassified, especially because their release will help the suffering people. We need to share what was released where, so we don't have to test every tick in every region. Just tell us what you released so we can know what to look for as far as diagnostics and how to treat them. Because all these weaponized germs a lot of times they require slightly different drugs to effectively treat them. And when you have combos, it's really difficult. But I think what's disturbing about right now is the censorship of just asking valid scientific questions. We're seeing it with Corona. We're seeing with these tick-borne diseases. We're seeing it with AIDS. We have better tools than ever, the technological, biological tools to really get to the bottom of it and the origins. And it should be okay to ask those questions.
Yeah.
Now we are three for truth. I think I would thank you very much, Kris.
Well, thank you for letting you tell my story. And, mostly the word I want to carry is just take tick-borne diseases really seriously and get treated soon because it's super hard to get rid of it in the chronic stages. I've read Ole's papers, and I thought he was really courageous to say, things like Rickettsia helvetica, which is maybe the same organism that was found around Lyme, Connecticut, does cause disease in people. And he got in trouble just for saying, hey, it's not a benign symbiont. It can cause disease in humans.
Can you show a book?
I can do it.
Ingmar shows the book. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it is available.
I'm proud to say it's won 3 journalistic awards for the writing too. And if you want to see some of the really nice old vintage photographs of the biological weapons program, you can go to my site, which is www.krisnewby.com. I have an animation that shows the spread of the disease across the United States too.
And I'm very proud of that. It's your handwriting, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Oh, it's dedication for me. Thank you.
Yeah. Very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too, Linus.
Thank you.
Thank all.
Yeah. And we say goodbye to the viewers. And we maybe meet someday again.
But we stay for after.